Community Development. We are recording the call, and if you need a Google Meet, you need to keep yourself on mute. You'll see the little mic button at the bottom until you're speaking. We'll have a time for some information sharing later. We also have the chat feature where you can, as you have questions as you go along, please go ahead and join. Put those in the chat. I want to introduce a couple of folks on the call from the Department of Housing and Community Development. We do have Cody Anderson and Kristen Dahlman in our policy team, Pam Kestner, our chief deputy, Casey Ensign in our housing policy team. We also have Willie Fobbs with our affordable special needs housing production, Michelle Carver with a homeless and special needs team, and she's the associate director there, Jay Grant and Matt Weaver from our community development team, both focused on some of the CDBG discussion we'll have later today. And I may have missed a few team members, so let me know if anyone I missed, but we will also ask you if you can go ahead and put in the chat your name, locality, or PDC and email. Some of you may have got this invitation as a forward or may have heard about it from a colleague. So we did set up this meeting to try to coordinate better with some of the housing related functions. For those of you who are working with us on broadband too, we did something similar with trying to information exchange and put out information on the broadband efforts that will be flowing through localities and DHCD. So go ahead and next slide, Kristen. So I think many of you are familiar with our agency, but we are the state agency focused on both economic development, Main Street, building and fire regulations, on housing and community development efforts. We're really a lead on being a partner in passing through state and federal funds to get at big, bold outcomes and solution-driven outcomes from that are driven locally and regionally. We also have gotten into rental assistance in a very large way in partnership with localities and the nonprofit partners across the Commonwealth to deliver emergency rental assistance during the pandemic and prevent evictions. Next slide. So really, I already did some of the introductions, and again, if you're just jumping on, please do add your contact to the chat so that we can capture and add you to a list of those that are going to be working in the housing space moving forward with some of the federal relief efforts. The real purpose of the briefing is that there's multiple funding streams that are beginning to flow, and we'll have different timelines, and we just really want to make sure we keep the lines of communication open among some of the sources and eligible uses for what we're seeing, and also hear about some of the plans at the local level and regional level for some of the resources that you're managing. Again, we're going to focus in on some of the housing related resources. Really want to hear some local feedback about some and regional from some of our planned uses of those funds, and just commit as things continue to evolve with Treasury guidance or HUD guidance, different things that may evolve with the General Assembly session this August and the allocation of additional state controlled state local recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan, that we just keep this dialogue open and talk about some next steps. Next slide. So some of the main resources, and we've gotten some great questions and heard some things from a handful of those on the call, and is to talk about a couple of resources that exist. One being the home funds and the emergency rental assistance from the American Rescue Plan. Also talk through the CDBG CV funds, so funds from the CARES Act that were an add-on for Community Development Block Grant. And then communicate eligible uses of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds as authorized by the American Rescue Plan concerning housing in particular. Again, learn how you all are planning to use your allocation of the American Rescue Plan funds and identify areas where coordination of effort maybe needed, where it can add and make sure that the outcomes that both the state and local leaders are seeking can be jointly sometimes funded with these different funds. So we're going to go through and give some more information on these specific funds and the status of where they are right now. And some of them, the guidance is evolving. Some of them you all have already seen. Several of these funds, like the Home American Rescue Plan and the CDBG CV entitlement communities, larger localities have received their own allocation as well. But unlike typical yearly allocations from HUD, there's some more opportunity for collaboration, even if you're an entitlement who's receiving some of those direct funds. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pam Kestner, our Chief Deputy and the Acting Director of our Housing Division, to go over the next portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Eric. Good morning, everyone. Can someone shake their head that they can hear me? Okay, thank you, Cody. Thanks, everyone. So as Eric mentioned, there are several sources of federal funds coming to our state and our community. We've been inundated really with funding, which is a good problem to have. Our challenge is ensuring that we all coordinate and make sure we maximize all of the dollars that are coming into Virginia so that we work with you all and other partners to meet the needs of people residing here in Virginia and our communities in general. We've received significant amounts of funds for CARES Act for a variety of reasons, but through the CDBG CV fund allocation, we will be kicking off next month, July 1st, designated $20 million for non-congregate shelter, and give more about that shortly. Also with CDBG CV, there are funds available to provide small business assistance, food security, and again, homeless services. The most recent tranche of funds coming to states and communities are the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA. We're going to talk about the home money that's focused specifically on homelessness, and utilizing ARPA also for our rent relief program through the emergency rental assistance. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, the eligible uses. Next slide, Cody. And speaking of slides, we will make this slide deck available for participants because we know that there's a lot of info here, and we're going to try to move through them quickly, but want to make sure you have all the info. So next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my, sorry, I was looking at my PowerPoint, not yours, Cody. So the CARES Act, through the Community Development Block Grant CV funds, as I mentioned, we are providing resources to our continuum of care organizations across the state to provide hotel motel vouchers for people experiencing homelessness. We began doing this early in the pandemic, and we're able to continue and use all the funds that we had available. We then transitioned to the Housing Trust Fund, and then July 1st, we will be transitioning to CDBG CV funds, and we'll have those funds available through March 31st, 2022. When I get through the winter months where non-congregate shelter may be needed. Also, as I mentioned earlier, CDBG CV funds are available also for small business assistance, food security, homelessness, etc. We have several members of our community development team on the call, so as we get to questions, feel free to ask for additional information there. But we do have around $10 million available through September 2022. Okay, next slide, Katie. The American Rescue Plan Act, they are making $5 billion available nationwide through HOME that specifically focuses on homelessness assistance. HUD is the federal agency administering these funds. The goal of these funds are to create housing and services for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. They are using the HUD definition of homelessness. 21 Virginia localities, including the state and or home consortium, are eligible for funds. In total, just under just over $95 million total for the Commonwealth. DHCD will be receiving nearly $40 million, and we're basing that on, it's about a 40% allocation using the HOME formula. Next slide. So this slide and the following slide lists all of the specific allocations to localities for the HOME ARC funds that are being used to address homelessness. So these are in alphabetical order, so you'll see those listed there. Then you have the other list completing the entire number of localities receiving HOME ARC allocation. Next slide. So specifically, HUD's definition as defined in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. The homeless definition are those at risk of definition, those individuals fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. Also focused on populations for whom supportive services would be prevalent, would prevent the family's homelessness or having a risk of housing instability. And then lastly, veterans and their families that meet any of the criteria listed above. Next slide. So it's important to keep in mind that while this is running through the HOME portion of HUD funds, it's not your typical HOME type of project. Currently, HOME eligible activities include tenant-based rental assistance, development and support of affordable housing, CHODO and nonprofit operating expenses to develop capacity, and also to provide administration support. Also included in these HOME ARC funds are supportive services that would include transitional housing, housing counseling, and homeless prevention. Also acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, and all are targeted as homeless assistance. Again, it's specifically for homelessness, even though it's running through HOME. Next slide. So currently the DHCD teams are exploring possible uses of the $39+ million that we are going to receive from the HOME ARC funds. We have begun initial assessment process to ensure that we identify gaps in services that these funds might be able to fill. Possible considerations would be motel and hotel conversion. We're hearing from a lot of communities that there's interest in converting hotels and motels into housing units. Also, to add funds to our affordable and special needs housing program to provide an additional, deeper subsidy for affordable housing. We'll also, of course, be needing to coordinate with existing state and local efforts, hence the need for this meeting and briefing today. So there'll be more to come. I think on the next slide is our the timeline. While these funds were announced by HUD, the Home Art Funds. They are not going to provide specific official guidance or the notice until this coming fall, but we do expect sometime this summer to receive some pre-guidance for the use of these funds. So in the meantime, we'll be working on gathering, again, the needs assessment. We'll also be planning for a public comment period because we will need to make or submit an amendment to our 21-22 action plan that's required by HUD. We will submit that late fall, this fall, and our goal would be to be under contract by the end of December of this year so that we could start allocating funds early in 2022. Keep in mind, these funds must be obligated by September 30th of 2025, and they must be expended by September 30th, 2030. So we have a bit more time than some of the other federal dollars coming our way. So that's the overview of the federal funding sources that we wanted to discuss on today's call. And now Kristen Dahlman will be kicking off talking about our rent relief program.
All right, I'm also going to do a sound check. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So just some updates on the Virginia Rent Relief Program. Some of the generalized coronavirus state and local fiscal funds that majority of localities in the state are getting. Some of the authorized uses are for rent and utility assistance. That's also authorized under the emergency rental assistance. So just wanted to provide, again, an overview of what the RRP program is designed to do at the state level. So it's intended to provide financial assistance for eligible households based upon both availability and household need. So it's for, at this point, rent payments. Mortgage payments will actually be coming through a homeowner assistance fund that will be managed by our sister agency of Virginia Housing. We do not have more updates on that at this time. And so the top goal is to keep households in safe and affordable housing by utilizing the ERA funds and making landlords and tenants whole, keeping people safely housed for their health and safety. Next slide. So the first tranche, there were two tranches of emergency rental assistance funding. So the first tranche of funding we're currently obligating and expending at this time. So as of this, as of June 2nd, we've dispersed more than 244.6 million in rent and mortgage relief payments. So that does include when we started the program last at the end of right around this time last year. So in total, that's almost 40,000 households have received rental relief payments, and almost 700 that received mortgage relief payments when we were using coronavirus relief funds and a little bit of state general fund, housing trust fund. And so for this first tranche of ERA funds, tenants are eligible for up to 15 months of assistance. And then, so that means that we can pay, you know, if they've been a year in arrearages, and then up to 3 months in advance. A tenant does not have to be in arrearages though to apply for the program. Right now, the eligibility is they can either qualify for unemployment benefits or meet the income eligibility requirements, and so someone could start to become behind on payments in the past few months, and then we can still pay 3 months up to in advance. They do need a full year's lease though to get up to those 3 months in advance though. Month to month, we can only pay 1 month in advance. And so in total, the Commonwealth received $569 million for emergency rental assistance. Some of that, Chesterfield County and Fairfax County opted to operate their own programs. So the state in total for this first tranche of funding has $524 million. The funds need to be obligated by September 30th of next year, or 2023. Next slide. And then for emergency rental assistance, the second tranche of funding, so this was authorized under the American Rescue Plan. So it allocated $451 million to Virginia. And it also includes, again, allocations for Chesterfield and Fairfax. And under this one, again, tenants can receive up to 3 additional months in advance, but also if they met the max for the 15 months under the first tranche of funding, they would still be able to be eligible for another 3 additional months with this second tranche of funding. And then funds can be obligated up until 2024, so the funding will be around for a while. So we just wanted to talk a little bit here about what is eligible based on the guidance that U.S. Treasury has released already for the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So they posted an interim rule and also a frequently asked questions or guidelines just stating eligible uses for housing. And so we want to use an opportunity to kind of hear feedback from you all as well once we go over the eligible uses, whether and if you all have some plans that might fit some of these definitions, or make sure that we're coordinating at the state and local level to get the max benefit out of this generalized pot of funding. So some eligible uses are supportive housing and other services for individuals experiencing homelessness, development of affordable housing, and housing vouchers and assistance relocating to neighborhoods with higher levels of economic opportunity. So for these 3 bullet points too, if you'll see here, it says to help address the disparate impact of COVID-19 on certain populations and geographies. So these do have to be eligible activities in a qualified census tract, or you just have to prove that this was a low-income population that was disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So has to meet either one of those. Next slide. And then just for meeting the criteria of negative economic impacts of the pandemic, some other uses for these generalized funds include that relate to housing include support for prevention, mitigation, or other services in congregate living facilities, so including homeless shelters, rent, mortgage, or utility assistance, as I had mentioned earlier, and then counseling and legal aid to prevent eviction or homelessness. So there's a variety of uses that intersect here with some of the services that you all may already be offering, or programs that we may be offering at the state level as well. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Eric here, but we just want to give this opportunity here to hear from you all and see if any of those uses are of interest, or if anyone has any plans yet.
Thanks, Kristen and Pam. A couple things to reemphasize this one over. One, as you can see, the coronavirus, and if you can go back just a couple slides, Cody, the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, there are multiple eligible uses in there where we do have some direct funds already flowing. I think the biggest example of that is the emergency rental assistance that Kristen and Pam went over, and I think the thing to point out on those funds is that we've really taken an approach in Virginia of developing a statewide model where we can centralize the application process, both have a landlord portal and a tenant portal, and try to screen households in, given the large amount of impact and a large amount of rent arrears, and knowing in the recovery period, many households will still need rental assistance as the economy picks up in different sectors and in different geographies across the Commonwealth. So we have at the national level, we've been one of the states to get up a program quickly and get out a significant amount of relief. As you all know, the federal eviction moratorium ends potentially June 30th. That is still uncertain, but there's it's slated to end at this point, June 30th, and then the public health emergency does end June 30th as well. So some of the state budget language that required tenants and landlords to work together, that part of the language will end, but there are other protections that the Governor and General Assembly put in place that will continue. And I do recommend the stayhomevirginia.com website. We're going to continue to update that resource as the protections on evictions evolve through as we get into the recovery phase. There are some protections that are going to maintain through the fall. The rent relief program, though, is the key tool there to be able to help tenants and landlords access that assistance and ensure that we get the word out far and wide through our networks. So, but as you can see, some of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds provide flexibility in that space as well. We do have nearly $1 billion that were allocated for the statewide program, and while we are spending those funds at a very fast clip of around 10 million a week. But so there are some funds in the interim here for rental assistance, but there are different pockets of funds that are in the eligibility portion here where there may not be need. There is not current program where there might be local need to bolster maybe some of the support around counseling or different assistance to be able to help people access the various resources available. I also want to just flag that on the home ARP funds, that we are, while we have that 39 million available statewide, we do plan to get comment on allowing some of there's a question in the chat for the entitlement communities to also have some access to those funds. In general, we want to make sure that we coordinate to create more units. I mean, we are really seeing one of the big challenges is moving households and utilizing rapid rehousing dollars from congregate and non-congregate shelter to permanent supportive housing or permanent housing options. And we are wanting to coordinate to make sure we fully utilize construction funds and do plan, as the slides mentioned, to use some of the home ARP funds for some of those construction eligible activities to create more units. And so that's one where we know that while 39 million is a lot of funding, there's the need statewide is significant, and the entitlement communities have funds available for that as well. So we'll be wanting to coordinate, especially in that space. And that if you're, I would just say if you're planning to use funds in any of the spaces that we currently have uses, please let us know, coordinate with us so we can, if you're planning to create a new program on X, and we could let you know what may exist or not exist statewide right now. And if you're seeing a gap in what currently is available in your community, we can also kind of talk through that and make sure we're aware of the needs that may not be covered by a current state or local program. So I wanted to flag, just to kind of emphasize that point, is the intention is to coordinate and to keep the dialogue open on that, because we know the General Assembly and localities will be allocating funds. Some of you have already allocated funds, so we want to just keep you aware what pots are set for certain things like rent assistance, and what pots like the Coronavirus State and Local Recovery Fund give a lot more flexibility to the eligible uses. There are a couple questions in the chat I did want to go over just real quick. One was why we mentioned the Chesterfield and Fairfax, that, you know, they were eligible to, along with the 10 largest localities, to operate their own rent relief programs. So we just wanted to flag those are the two localities that chose to have their own programs. So other than Chesterfield and Fairfax, the rent relief program covers the remainder of the Commonwealth in terms of eligibility for your residents. You know, we're partnering together on our delivery of that effort. And then I did see Bonnie from Central Shenandoah PDC also asked about daycare. And so I don't know if Matt is on, but I would say a good point about like that question. We have some planned uses for the current COVID related funds, but our annual appropriation for CDBG does have eligibility for at least the construction or rehab of daycare facilities where there are the benefits meet HUD, low to moderate income beneficiary designations. So would recommend, Bonnie, that we set up a call with you and Matt Weaver to discuss just what the eligible uses there. And then I know that DSS and Department of Education as well have some different efforts going on in the childcare space. So would recommend those of you interested in that space, the Matt Weaver and the CDBG team at DHCD could coordinate on that. So at this point, I think, the other one was, can entitlement communities that don't receive home funds apply for the home ARP allocation to the state? Currently, we believe we have that flexibility to allow that and are looking at, you know, with that timeline, Pam went over earlier, that we would take input on that as we go into the updating our action plan with HUD. So we believe that that will be the case, but we definitely are interested in thoughts on that. So with that, I do want to make sure we go ahead, Cody, a couple slides to the feedback process. We do want to make sure that, and I know it's a large group meeting, so it's hard to kind of talk through everything in a large group meeting, but we do, one, if there's things that you're hearing from your region or that you're planning or you're thinking through, your partnering localities across the Commonwealth are probably thinking through those as well, or might not have thought of something you have, vice versa. So we did want to give some open time period here to definitely ask us any questions, but also to ask, to make suggestions to, or throw out things that you're hearing are gaps in terms of addressing the housing needs of your locality and some of the thoughts around the different funding sources. So with that, I'm going to throw it open. And Pam, I don't know if you or Kristen can monitor the chat to help us look through some of the questions that could be fielded by different team members.
Sure. So we have a question regarding the RFP that went out for the rent relief program to conduct outreach and engagement. One of our goals is to ensure that communities of color, tenants and landlords who may not have access to the internet, and other populations that are having challenges even learning about the program or accessing the program, we want to ensure that they have access across the state. So we have awarded the grant to Home, Housing Opportunities Made Equal. They are launching that early in July. We're in the process of working with them and their partners and getting trained. And so as we roll this out, we'll be eager to get you all connected to the organizations in your communities and in your regions that can assist you in getting tenants and landlords their applications completed and processed. So thank you for that question. Also a question, who should we contact to discuss a nonprofit building, a non-congregate regional homelessness shelter? funding. So, Melody, you asked that question. Just to clarify, are you looking at such as the hotel motel acquisition, or just or actually building a shelter, not building a new facility? Okay. So I believe, Eric, that would be something that we would need to kick around both with our homelessness team and CDB and the community development team.
Yeah, so I would recommend we get that with Jay and Lindsay, and that team can coordinate between the homelessness team and our CDBG and other home ARP resources. So if you put your email in the chat, and Lindsay, if you could put your email in the chat too, related to, and help coordinate a discussion on that project idea. That's exciting.
Thanks, Eric. So we have had some folks that joined a little bit late, and someone has asked to repeat the date the assistance program will be announced. I'm not sure which assistance programs you're referring to. The home ARP dollars funding that are available specifically to address homelessness, we are still awaiting more guidance from HUD. We'll be getting some unofficial guidance over the summer. The notice will be published in the fall. We will be getting public input in the fall. We're currently conducting some assessments of what gaps might be in communities that these funds could plug. We will submit an amended action plan to HUD and later in the fall, and with the hope that everything will be approved and under contract with HUD by the end of December, making the home ARP funds available early in 2022. I think those are the questions. I know we have several folks on the phone, so if you are on the phone and have questions, feel free to unmute. We have another question in the chat from Andy Friedman. One of the potential advantages for development of new projects would be to combine home ARP with local relief funds and DHCD home ARP. Is there any prohibition about combining this in one development project? We've had that question before, Eric, and we don't believe there would be. In fact, it would be great to be able to maximize resources. Do you want to go into more detail?
Yeah, Andy, I think that's one of the best possible ideas that we've been thinking of as well, is that as you develop local relief funds, and if any of them are in the there's going to be emergency relief efforts, obviously, but then if there's some in the construction and the long-term more supply space, right now we don't see any prohibition on combining DHCD home ARP with locality relief funds in that space, with your regular home allocation, with your regular CDBG allocation, with your application through DHCD for other resources. So those not familiar, our Affordable Special Needs Housing Program, currently you can apply for National Housing Trust Fund, the State Housing Trust Fund, our regular home allocation, and now new housing innovations and energy efficiency funds to increase energy efficiency on rehab and new construction. We're envisioning that we would add these home ARP funds through in that process potentially, so that you could apply at the same time, and that we are, encouraging that those will be limited, as you know, 39 million. So if we can pair with the local resources that you all will be potentially deploying on housing, that would be our intention with kind of getting the message out on some of these funds. I think it's as far as we see, there's no prohibition. Things continue to evolve with Treasury funds, but it appears to be evolving in a way that's more and more things are eligible. But I don't know if any other team member has anything else to add on that on the DHCD side.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
Are most folks on the phone are and if you want to unmute or if you want to put in the chat, are you are the funds that you're looking at housing, are they mostly, you know, additional construction related activities, creation of more units? Is it emergency relief? And if so, kind of what kind of emergency relief? Is it, you know, legal aid, counseling, and then, or is it a combo? Like, is there, are there thoughts anyone wants to share in that space about what you foresee as some of the main housing related investments that your locality will be making? I'm thinking there might be some long chats going into the text box right now, so I'm giving a lot of silence here. And again, I know maybe some of you will be waiting till after your councils and board of supervisors allocate. We certainly will also be knowing a lot more once any proposed. To keep in mind, you know, August 2nd is the date for the upcoming General Assembly session to allocate the 4.3 billion in the state, the part that the state will appropriate for those state local recovery funds from the rescue plan. So we will, you know, obviously want to make sure we reconvene after the final decisions are made during that special session, and likely, you know, in advance of that special session, we'll see what the governor's proposed suggestions are for the use of those funds. So that, you know, that's an area where some of those funds, like to Andy Friedman's point, could potentially pair with anything you're doing in the housing space, and could help incentivize and prioritize jointly together different housing efforts.
Eric, there were some comments in the chat, so I'll just read them so the folks on the phones have the benefit. From Kate Gibson, she states that I know we have localities interested in developing affordable units, either adaptive reuse or new construction. From the city of Danville, the city of Danville is currently using CDBG CV funds for emergency rent relief. And then Patrick Monty, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Patrick. New units are part of discussion and one of the most critical needs for local funds received from ARP. Most are also looking at water/wastewater and broadband infrastructure projects as well. Joan Duckett, Prince William County for the Home ARP funds is considering a competitive application process for local nonprofits for acquisition of housing to be used for affordable rentals for low, moderate income households. Definitely need to see about partnering there. Great information. Thank you all for sharing.
Yeah, that's really helpful information. With Danville, if you wanted to have a sidebar conversation with our rent relief team, you know, we do have an extraordinary amount of resources available there right now, and there may be some things that maybe aren't eligible that you're using those CDBG funds for, but it might be a good conversation for us to follow up. So Pam, I don't know if you want to put Senta's email in, and Dan, but we could circle to just coordinate on to make sure. And I know those CV funds that you're using will expire at the end of this calendar year. So the emergency rental assistance funds we have will have that longer period, and we're working. In the slides, it gives the end date for when the funds have to be used by, but we also have some obligation deadlines for both ERA 1 and 2 that we're working on for this September and for next May, so that we can make sure the state has those resources available for the long term. So just to factor that into your planning. And then the other comment about Patrick, your comment was helpful too. I mean, we are, for those who haven't heard the couple presentations our DHCD and Commonwealth Connect team gave on the broadband side of things. We had a similar presentation about the governor and General Assembly announced that they want to make the last mile build out, excitingly, speed that up to about the next 18 months with use of some of these American Rescue Plan funds. So there'll be a lot of need for both state and local recovery funds to help make that happen. And the water wastewater needs too are critical. Would love to hear the Prince William County example as you kind of have that model set up for the competitive application process for local nonprofits, and would love to see that application process, and we'd be happy to help share it with others interested, and maybe some of those projects could help apply for future rounds of affordable special needs housing as well, and kind of partner together on those funds.
Any comments or questions from people on the phone? So we have a question in the chat. Can you point to guidance documents that state that localities can utilize ARPA funds for housing?
So Kristen, can you put in the chat the FAQ? So there's a specific language that, just trying to pull up too, that was in this PowerPoint slide that Kristen went over that reference specific housing items. And I'm trying to figure out the FAQ number, but we can, oh, there he goes. So the FAQs have that number. Kristen, do you remember the number on that one? I think it was like,
I think it should start on page starting on page 3, towards like the middle of the page. Says eligible uses, and so the first one, 2.1, just talks about support for prevention, mitigation, or other services in congregate living facilities, so homelessness. And then, let's see. And then on page 4, towards the bottom, 2.5. Second paragraph in talks about different assistance to households.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, it's pretty, we pulled those directly from this, so there's a lot in there on, I'm just looking at page 6 too, the fiscal recovery funds, building stronger neighborhoods and communities, included supportive housing and other services for individuals experiencing homelessness, development of affordable housing, and housing vouchers and assistance, relocating in neighborhoods with higher levels of economic opportunity. So they go into some great detail about some different eligible uses and kind of all the areas we've been working on, most of them that we've been working on in housing. Well, we're coming close to the end, and we don't need to keep you the whole hour, but I did really want to make sure to thank the team at DHCD that put this together, and for all of you for spending time today and for your efforts at administering historic investment levels for all the areas that DHCD works on. Please do leave um, keep the lines of communication open as you're hearing things about local plans for funds and or gaps where you think the state funds can be helpful. We're going to continue to try to do the same. And again, just really appreciate you taking the time today. And we'll send a follow-up email with just all who are on here, so you have a point of contact and information sharing that we can make sure you have if you don't already have someone you're working with at DHCD. All right. Well, everyone have a great rest of the day, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.